for joining us. We have, as a community, just done some amazing work to get CFTR modulators covered, but we still have a lot of work to do in Ontario. And the election presents us with a great opportunity to bring some of the issues that people are facing in terms of access and affordability of CF medicines to the forefront of all of the parties. So, today we want you to learn a little bit more about the current state of the provinces. Where are the political parties sitting in terms of their key issues leading into the election, as well as any opportunities that there are to influence your members of provincial parliament during the election period. So, we will be providing you with some tips and best practices for getting your message across to members of provincial parliament, because now is a good time to be meeting with those individuals to really help, just get a feel from them about how they're feeling about these issues, but B, seek some commitments leading up to the election. And for those who are running again and hopefully elected again, the opportunity to follow up after the election on those commitments. We're also today going to unveil our CF Canada election, our CF Can't Wait Ontario election campaign materials and launch the campaign. So this will include our calls to action, key messages and asks, and really all of the tools and resources that you'll need to meet with and write to your elected officials. You'll also hear firsthand from Danielle Weil, who's a CF advocate and very active, that's the word I'm looking for, very active in Ontario. Danielle has been doing this type of work for a long time. She's like a super advocate, and she's going to share some of her experiences with you in how to hold a meeting and what's really worked for her in the past. With that, I will introduce the panel. So from Hill and Knowlton Strategies, which is one of Canada's largest and I would say most influential public relations and government relations firms. We have Alexandra Valcourt, who is the account director for public affairs. And we also have Matt Boudreau, who's the senior account director for public affairs. And of course, I mentioned we have Danielle Weil, who's a CF mom and an Ontario advocate, and somebody who just has done a lot of advocacy right throughout Ontario. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Alexander and Matt.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Kim. So happy to be here, and thank you for having Matt and I. Matt and I are going to split up our presentation. So Matt, if it's okay with you, a head nod, I'll introduce myself very briefly and then get started with my slides, and then you can introduce yourself when you start. As Kim already said, I am an account director on the for public affairs on the health and wellness team, specifically at H&K. In my previous life, I like to say I worked for the current government as a senior policy advisor, both at the Office of the President of the Treasury Board, and more recently from February of 2020 to April of last year, I was working for the Minister of Long-Term Care. With that being said, so some of those experiences are going to help me today pass along some additional information that will hopefully help you in your engagement with, in particular, those parties as you move forward. Ryan, could we, I guess if the slides are already going, I can't see them.
Oh, I'm just sharing now.
Thank you so much. Okay, that's wonderful. And if you could turn, I think to slide 3 is where I'll get going. So Kim has already introduced what Matt and I are going to broadly speak about today. But let's start with why engage now. So I think that we all know and understand that engagement is always important because the decisions of government, particularly provincial government, affect each of us every day. But engaging at this particular time is important for a couple of reasons. Up until the writ drops, and that's when the election is officially called, We have one final opportunity to get the government support, in particular for those living with cystic fibrosis. But in addition to that, all parties will be building their election agenda and promises. So they'll be making decisions about what they're going to promise to Ontarians as they head out onto the campaign trail. We call that their party platform. So as parties build their platforms, we want those living with cystic fibrosis to be top of mind. And so we engage with them at this time for that reason. And finally, elected officials become more acutely aware of issues that impact individuals, like those living with cystic fibrosis, who live in their ridings. Because remember that every minister, committee member, opposition member, they might have a separate title, but at the core of their job, they are an elected member of provincial parliament, put in their role to represent that group of individuals that live amongst their community. So ultimately, this pre-election time gives stakeholders like yourselves, community members, and even opposition parties a lot more leverage to make effective change. If you could go to the next slide, Ryan. So understanding where we are now will help us build our most effective case for change. And so it probably comes as no surprise that COVID-19 is going to be a very impactful ballot box issue. And by that, we just mean it will be a primary focus for a lot of voters. Voters, we anticipate, will ask themselves questions like, or think about how the government reacted to COVID, how opposition parties or individual members reacted, what their responses were to the pandemic, what they did for us, both the government and opposition. All of these small thoughts or small decisions are going to make up that bigger decision of who to vote for. So where we see things standing right now are that the progressive Conservatives are favored to win government again, albeit a smaller majority than they have now. And this does come after a couple of very tumultuous years of what I would call pandemic governing. And I think that is our prediction for a couple of reasons that have to do with the other parties at play. So the NDP are anticipated to struggle to regain some of the gains that they got in 2018, some of those additional seats that they won. The Liberal Party continues in their rebuilding mode, and while they have a new leader, that leader remains untried and a little bit of a question mark for some voters. And finally, the Green Party will try to capitalize on what I'd call the personal likability of their leader, but we anticipate them also struggling to maintain the gains that they saw in the 2018 election. So we're going to move into some party outlines next, and Ryan, if you could change the slide. We want to share with you our thoughts on what the election priorities are going to be, so that you can take all of these ideas and situations into account when you are meeting with anybody on the subject. And Matt's going to talk a little bit more about how to effectively use this information. The next one too, again, please, Ryan. Awesome, thank you. So the Progressive Conservatives, again, I think it comes as no surprise that COVID has changed the course of this government and where the original plan they had in place. I would say that Doug Ford was a rather brute change when he became premier in 2018, but his image was relatively softened in those early days of the pandemic, when he would stand at the podium every day, when he would talk to Ontarians, when he would sympathize and empathize with other people. His image changed rather drastically. Subsequent to that, however, decisions to close the province or keep the province closed, additional regulations, et cetera, due to COVID, have continued to sink some support for Doug Ford. And broadly speaking, overall, his approval ratings have dropped across the province. All that being said, priorities for Doug Ford and his candidates in the upcoming election, we anticipate being, first and foremost, ending the pandemic. Then improving health system capacity, which includes hospitals and home care, but with a particular focus on improving long-term care for seniors. Making Ontario more affordable for all Ontarians, supporting workers and expanding economic growth, and returning to an attempt to balance budgets. If you could go to the next slide, please, Ryan. Thank you. Excuse me, sorry. The NDP, their leader, Andrea Horwath, we would say is well liked. This likability and her general demeanor often wins her support from everyday Ontarians. Despite this difference between her and Premier Ford, she's yet to find that sweet spot or that way in which she can portray herself as the most suitable replacement as Premier. And I think worth noting that there was a period of time during the pandemic when she garnered some criticism for what was deemed as rather harsh or perhaps untimely opposition politicking, but also worth noting that that time has passed, and I think we are back to that likability and everyday demeanor. We do anticipate a return to the voting norm, which in 2022, which is just to say that the NDP did gain a lot of additional seats because there were people weary of voting again for a Liberal government, but also weary of voting for the PCs, the Progressive Conservatives. So we do anticipate seeing a little bit more distinction in those three voting areas. The NDP won't sit so much in that middle. We anticipate that Andrea Horwath and her candidates' priorities during this election are going to be improving life and getting back to normal post-pandemic lives. Greater support for aging Ontarians, primarily in home care, but also in long-term care, with a particular focus on for-profit and not-for-profit long-term care. Better jobs in all sectors with more opportunities for benefits for all workers. Improving the education system, arguably at the many different levels that we have it, while also offering new job opportunities for students. And finally, creating and perhaps even building more affordable housing, which would include supportive housing for those in need. If you can jump to the next slide, but that's where I'm going to leave you and hand it off to my colleague, Matt.
Great, thanks. Hi, everybody, and thank you all so much for joining us today. I hope I'm coming across that folks can hear me. As mentioned, I'll introduce myself right now. My name is Matt Boudreau. I am a senior account director, also on the health and wellness team doing public affairs work alongside Alex here at Hill and Moulton. I've been at H&K for just over 5 years, working exclusively with health sector clients. Previously, I was at Queen's Park, where I worked for the previous Ontario Liberal government, including about 4 years working for the then Health Minister, Deb Matthews, and Eric Hoskins. So you can probably all understand it pains me to agree with Alex that the Liberals are probably not going to form the next government here in Ontario. Doug Ford is likely to get reelected, likely in a reduced majority government. And I think that's largely because the Ontario Liberal Party is still very much in rebuilding mode. That being said, the Liberal Party may be the only party that is well positioned to actually increase its support in the House, if only because there really is no other direction for them to go. Where this matters for all of you is I would expect in some of the traditionally strong Liberal areas, particularly in Toronto, Ottawa, and some parts of the GTA, we will see a changeover in a lot of the sitting MPPs. It is likely that both Conservatives and New Democrat MPPs in those regions will be replaced by Liberal MPPs. So when we're thinking about engagement, particularly once we get into the election period, looking at Liberal candidates in those parts of the province as engagement targets will be important, and limiting, frankly, your expectations that some of the local MPPs right now in those areas will still be there next year. Alex has already noted the challenges that the Liberals are facing include the fact that they are trying to rebuild. They are struggling with fundraising right now. Their leader, Stephen Del Duca, is not very well known. He is not the most charismatic person you will have ever met. And he was a former Wynne cabinet minister. He is seen, rightly or wrongly, by many in the party as being an insider, which may not be your best bona fides when your party's been decimated at the polls. He's also seen as a centrist, while the party's grassroots has moved much more to the left. And so we're seeing in some ways a bit of a strong correction in that direction, emphasizing things like basic income, electoral reform, and 4-day work weeks that are probably more important to parts of the Liberal base than to Ontarians overall. We've also seen that the Liberals have learned from their past that they tended to be very technocratic and focused on individual stakeholder groups. They're now trying to take an approach that's a little bit more retail and that would resonate with ordinary Ontarians. In the healthcare space, that means above all a real focus on long-term care and on rebuilding the health system after what's happened through COVID-19. I think that the challenge for CF advocates in this space, and this would apply to just about all of the parties, is making access to medications a real priority within that milieu. And this is where, when we come into an election season, for the reasons Alex has already talked about, there is that opportunity, if only because you're speaking to officials and candidates, not just as a minister or a parliamentary assistant or an opposition critic, but also as a local representative who cares about and needs to champion what's important to the people living in their riding. Ryan, if we can go to the next slide. And so I'll speak very quickly to the Greens. Alex already mentioned Mike Schreiner is a very, very likable person, well-liked across parties, and somewhat unusually has created a persona that I would say is not just a persona, but seems to be how he actually does business, of trying to reach across party lines, of agreeing with other parties when he feels that they have put forward good ideas. This is also, frankly, politically speaking, a recognition that the Greens are probably many years away, even optimistically, from forming official opposition, let alone government. And so maintaining strong relationships with the other parties is an important way for them to help push their agenda. We don't expect that they will make large gains. They may not make any gains, although MPP Schreiner may be able to hold on in Guelph. But I would say anecdotally, that both the Greens and the NDP have tended to have better relationships behind the scenes, particularly with the health minister, than the Ontario Liberals do. And so if you're looking at who outside of the PC party can be good advocates for you at Queen's Park, Mike Schreiner or even a France Chalina for the NDP may not be up there in question period yelling at the government about your issues, but it may actually be better to have them instead coming after question period, tapping the minister on the shoulder and saying, this is something that really matters to people living with CF. So if we can go to the next slide. And the next one. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about tips and best practices. Some of you will already know this. Some of you, this will be new information. But if you are going to be meeting with local MPPs, in the run-up to the election period or with candidates during the campaign, for how to make sure you make most effective use of your meeting time. I will flag that some of this will be covered later on in this webinar by Kim as well, and I know that CF Canada has put together some information, tools, and resources, including key messages that will help you in reaching out to arrange and then attending meetings. And I want to build on that a little bit. Key messages underline all three of the tips that you see on this page. Having key messages that are about not just your story, but the story of people living with CF and your priorities particularly around complex issues like access to drugs, like Trikafta, and where that's at in the approval process, recognizing that you may be, in most cases, meeting with people who are non-expert. Key messages can help you ensure that you remain brief and on point. Meetings will rarely be more than 30 minutes. They may be only 15, and you want to make sure you are saving time to have some back and forth dialogue, some questions, but still hammering home the key messages that you really need to stay in your colleagues' minds. So brevity is really helpful in that, avoiding technical terms, avoiding acronyms, assuming that unless you are meeting with the Minister of Health, the person across the table from you probably doesn't know a lot about life with CF and may not even be experts in Ontario's health system. At the same time, you need to tell your story or the story of your loved ones in a way that really resonates, that makes it real for the officials and not just about studies and statistics, but that is still tying back into your key messages and is basically showing why it is that these messages are actually important, and why, if the government does what you want them to do, it will make a difference to you. And repetition is key. Having simple key messages that you are able to say more than once, including in your meeting request, in any follow-up, or in response to questions, will just help to make sure that those 2 or 3 key things that you want to be remembered are remembered. And if we can go to the next slide, please. The so what rationale is really important here. So at the end of the day, elected officials want to know what it is that you're asking for. And this is something I'll say generally, a lot of folks who are meeting with elected officials or political candidates are afraid to ask them for something. But actually, that's what they want. They want you to ask them for something, because it's only by asking them for something that they understand what it is they can do to have a positive impact on your life, and in this case, on the lives of the CF community. So show why it is that what you are asking for. Should it be access to rare drugs or drugs for rare diseases? Should it be ensuring that Trikafta is funded in a way that allows people to get it? Make sure that they understand why that is real, why it's important, and what they can do to help. Never engage in partisan critiques, even if it's about the other side. You want to be entirely non-partisan, neutral, and keep it focused on the issue and your story. Don't be afraid if you don't know the answer to every question. In fact, I would say that can be a good thing, because you know what's even better than sending a thank you and follow-up? It's saying thank you, and here's that information you wanted, because then it's not just a meeting, then you have started a dialogue. So it is totally okay to say, I'm not sure about that, but I'll follow up and get you the information. And then that leads into the last point here. No matter what, make sure you reach out and say thank you. I will say that MPPs and political candidates have a lot of demands on their time. And so you want to be genuinely appreciative that they are taking the time to meet with you. But frankly, that also serves your interests, because it makes sure that there's a warm relationship. And I would say wait a day or two before sending the thank you, so that it's then a reminder a day or two later that, oh yeah, I did have this great meeting, and that's a really important issue. So if we go to the next slide, I think the next slide is the last slide. So I will stop talking there. I'm afraid we went a little bit over time, but I hope it's been helpful, and I really look forward to having your questions.
Thanks, Matt. And thanks, Alexandra. We did receive a question. It came in as you were speaking from Paul. And the question is there a party, a political party that that supports CF more so than another? And what I'll just kind of kick off here with the CF Canada hat, and then I'll turn it to both of you for your perspectives here. You know, Cystic Fibrosis Canada is a registered health charity, and as such, we are required to be nonpartisan in our approach to advocacy and government relations, and that's you know, required by the CRA. So and so we are very careful when we are working with government and with elected officials, that we are working with all parties, across parties. So what I tend to look not so much at, is there a party that is more supportive. They may have policies that are better for the community, but we really look for those champions inside each party who can help build support within the party. And Matt, Alexandra, any thoughts there?
I'll jump in first. I think that's exactly right, Kim. I think that's the right instinct. I think it's also important to understand that, you know, no matter what, there will be one party that is forming the government. There may be a minority situation where other parties have influence. We have to be prepared to speak with anyone across the table. I think the important point here is to understand what is compelling to the different parties, and then as best you can, position your ask accordingly. The only thing I'll say at a very high level in this context is, in my experience, Alex may disagree, in my experience, I would say that the Conservatives tend to be a little bit more kind of retail focused on what is the ground level impact to individual Ontarians, their families, their loved ones, of any issue, including CF. It's been my experience that the Liberals and NDP tend to look a little more at kind of what is the evidence behind your ask, where is the science, what are the numbers? But Alex, I'll see if you have anything to add.
No, I think I don't actually disagree with that, Matt, even if I maybe should, but I don't. And I do think that the only piece I would add is I think that that position that you're in, Kim, where it is to be nonpartisan and where it is to meet with everybody right across the board, is just another way that you can leverage this particular engagement period, because everybody right across the board will be looking to do the most that they can in whatever way works for their priorities at the same time. And so engaging on living with CF and how that affects people and what the statistics behind it is, all of that will become a part of what they're focused on in the next couple of weeks and months.
A moment. I had another question come in, but I'll actually cover the content of that question in my presentation. So before I close off with Alexandra and Matt, are there any other questions for Hill and Knowlton? We'll have another question period at the end, so you'll have an opportunity then. All right, thanks everyone. Ryan, if you don't mind pulling up my slide deck, please. Okay, perfect. I can see it now. So can you go to the next slide, please, Ryan? So I wanted to thank all of you, not only for making time to be here today, but leading up to this election and throughout all of the work that we've done in Ontario to try to get modulators and other CF medicines covered. You know, a special thank you to members of the Ontario Election Task Force. They helped us really put the materials together, get the asks right, and just, you know, brought their lived experience to all of the work that we've done for the election, and which I'm about to unveil for you. And I also want to thank all of you who have shared your stories with us, either formally or informally on social, those who have done case studies for us so that we can understand individual issues. Just you doing that allows us to provide, you know, a real insight of lived experience of how access is being, you know, impeded, or which barriers people are bumping up against when trying to access these medicines. And we would not have the understanding that we do without you sharing with us. So thank you so much. Next slide, please. So I'm not going to go through all of this, but for those who won't join us in person, I wanted to provide some detail. So there are actually 3 phases to our Ontario election campaign here. And the first phase is starting today, where we're calling on you to meet with your members of provincial parliament in lead up to the election Our goal is to meet with as many MPPs as possible. And again, we are going to use those meetings to determine who among these individuals are running again. Some have declared, some have not. You know, and you can sometimes tease that out in a conversation. If you have somebody who is sitting that you already have a relationship with and they haven't declared, you know, they might talk to you in confidence, or just tell you, I can't help you because I'm not running again, but let me go talk to the minister now. You know, so important to determine who are our champions. Are there people who are almost champions that we can continue to educate, and who are the people among these champions that we know will probably come back in the fall? And so holding these meetings with members of provincial parliament at this time serves many purposes. And then, yes, we're building support among these individuals for policy acts and calls to action, which I will get into. And to the extent that we can, we want to influence late stage individual party platforms. So, you know, 3 months ago, did we know Doug Ford was going to, provide the registration for license plates and your renewals for free? We didn't know that, right? But that obviously is an election goodie that came out just in time for people to have, a memory of what Doug Ford did for them. So before they go to the polls, you know, he gave us a break. So there's always, you know, although parties will frame their platform formally, there's always opportunity to get commitments and sometimes to elevate an issue, drug access, to a level that it becomes an issue in an election. And that's what we're hoping to do. Phase 2, I'm not going to spend too much time on, but what we do is we take what we did with the members of provincial parliament and we convert it to candidates. It's a bit of a different approach, but we will we will have a toolkit for you when that happens, and we will host another webinar like this, so you know, how do I talk to a candidate? What's the difference? How else can I engage a candidate in ways that I maybe wasn't able to engage an MPP? So stay tuned for more on phase 2, and then phase 3, post-election. Summer and fall, this is what Matt was talking about. You want to follow up with your meetings, you know, a few days after the meetings. But then there's another opportunity after Health Canada rules on Trikafta. That'll come April 27th. And then CADTH will come, the draft CADTH sometime in May. And then the final recommendation will probably come in June. So you will have, after the election, everything that you need to go back to your member or your new sitting member to talk about what they need to do to fix the access challenges. Next slide, please. So I'm not going to spend too much time here. Some of you who joined us for the Trikafta Today rare disease strategy briefing last week saw this, but I want to give you a sense of how long it has taken for Ontario and other provinces to get to funding modulators. So Kalydeco was approved for one mutation in 2002. It went through a series of different negotiations and chances of listing agreements with provinces, but it wasn't actually fully negotiated until last year's deal on Orkambi, Kalydeco, and Trikafta that the manufacturer struck through the Pan-Canadian Pharmaceutical Alliance. So that is the body that collectively negotiates on behalf of our governments, who then go and negotiate further with the manufacturer. But what you can see here is this Kalydeco, as they started to add new mutations and age groups, kept coming back to the table. And that's exactly what we don't want to happen. You know, we don't want it to take almost a decade to ensure that everybody who is indicated for that drug can access it. And an election is a great time for us to look to the past, look at now, and project into the future. So this is what we don't want, you know, Orkambi, Kalydeco kind of working their way through the system independently without a plan, and no government really doing an excellent job on providing access. Some have done better jobs than others, but this has been a real struggle for the community and for governments. They just, you know, they have they've had difficulty covering these types of medicines financially, and they don't always understand the science. So, you know, we are here to advocate to make sure that not only are the drugs covered, but that they're done so in a timely and accessible fashion. So next slide, please. So in 2019, we had a breakthrough when it came to modulators. We had, this is an animation, so you just do a 1, 2, 3, all right? Just, yeah, perfect. We had 3 provinces kind of come out collectively to say that they would fund Orkambi in some way, shape, or form. Now, the way in which they funded Orkambi was not very inclusive. It wasn't inclusive at all. But the fact that they went against a CADTH recommendation to not fund Orkambi was a first for us. Because the CADTH, the cost effectiveness study, when they make a recommendation, it's non-binding. And so provinces and territories can take that or leave that. They usually take it and accept that. But this was the first time that we saw deviation from that practice. Next slide, please. And Kalydeco still was being negotiated. Thanks. Next slide, please. So then we get word Trikafta is coming to Canada. Okay, so I just want to put this in perspective here, because what's important here is we see that as Trikafta is coming to Canada, other jurisdictions, the FDA, most notably NHS England, the National Health Services, they're just so far ahead of us in terms of their approvals and reimbursement. So FDA, I think everybody knows, October 21st, 2019 for 12 plus, they were able to approve that drug and get it funded so quickly. And granted, the funding model is very different in the US, but the approval came through 4 different mechanisms. That's how important this drug is. England, shortly thereafter, announced that they actually struck a deal on Orkambi, Symdeko, it's called Symkevi in Europe, and Kalydeco. So that's what our country just did last June. So this was in 2019. So in 2020, December of 2020, CADTH and ANAS, our cost effectiveness bodies, noted that they would be having a review of Trikafta for 12 plus. And then it took, you know, until June 20, I think it was the 23rd or the 25th of, sorry, it was June of last year. I meant to put the date in here. So Health Canada, you know, approved the drug on, I believe it was June 17th. And then we still had to get all of the provinces to come in to fund it, right? So this just shows how far behind Canada is in terms of helping people access innovative therapies. And we have policies and practices in place that are starting to come together to make it the process move faster and in a fairer way. But we're still behind the curveball. So once we talk about improving access, we have to talk about system change. Next slide, please. And then, you know, we got the Health Canada approval, and on September 4th, Alberta, Ontario, and Saskatchewan, those 3 provinces again, show up. And that is important because it again shows that provinces are wanting to work together to fund these therapies. They know that they can't fund them alone. You know, this is not just about cystic fibrosis. There are drugs for other rare diseases. And it makes sense for our governments to work together to fund those therapies, to make sure that people can get them. Next slide, please. So you saw that crazy Kalydeco and Orkambi timeline. Kalydeco is, you know, it took almost a decade to get to where we are today. This is the Trikafta timeline. So we received notice that the drug would be reviewed on December 18th in Health Canada, approved on June 18th. And then by the time November came, all payers were funding the drug in some way, shape, or form. Now, again, not all payers were funding it as well as they could be, but many of them did a really good job of funding this drug. And they also, some have adjusted since implementation to make it easier. Next slide, please. So just to point it out, almost 10 years versus 11 months. Okay, so for Kalydeco Trikafta. So lots of reasons why. Some of that is the drug itself, having just being so efficacious. The other is the system has changed, and we happen to catch all of the parts, at least at the front end, that were working in our favor. And then we got to reimbursement in the provinces and realized that some provinces are doing worse than others, and Ontario is not among the best. Next slide, please. So access for some. When Minister Elliott made the commitment to fund Trikafta and other therapies on September 24th, the commitment was to fund all therapies for all Ontarians or fund these therapies for all Ontarians with CF. What we have found out then, and many of you have this lived experience, is that getting drugs funded in Ontario is not so easy. We have different drug programs, Trillium and OHIP plus, with Trillium, people are required to pay a deductible, even if they already have private insurance. It's another deductible if their private insurance is not covering the drug. OHIP Plus is only available to those who are 25 years and younger, so you are 24 years and younger. You could have a 23-year-old who has OHIP Plus who can access the drug, and a 23-year-old who has to go through Trillium and has to pay a deductible or two deductibles and still can't access the drug or fully access the drug without paying out of pocket. So, where's the equity there? We also saw that private insurance, for the first time in our history of these therapies, moved way slower than the public insurers. And what that has created is a bit of a kink where there's a wave of people who qualified for public funding, and there are people who are still trying to get their private insurance covered. So this is something we are talking to government about, and it is in the kit that for the election. I think if you are an individual or somebody in your family who has bumped up against private insurance and how the public system doesn't work well with the private insurance, you have a story to tell. Politicians are interested in that, because it's about access to medicines, and B, the private insurers have a role to play, our governments do not want people tapping into the public system if they don't have to. And because there's been some delays in health insurance, private health insurance, more people are going to the public system, and that's going to probably grow with the 6 to 11-year-olds. Next slide, please. So Ontario, this is going to be, it's in the package that you'll receive a link to. So, Ontario has the second highest deductibles for this program, the Trillium drug program, than any comparable program in Canada. So next slide, please. I think the takeaway there is Ontario is a big province. Other provinces have made these medicines more readily affordable. Why can't Ontario? Why do people have to pay this much in the deductible to access life-saving and life-changing medicines? Next slide, please. So these are the questions that are going to come up. How will the money, what's Ontario's role? What's the plan? And I say this because you may recall that in 2019, the federal government committed to a rare disease strategy, a drugs for rare disease strategy, and that is supposed to be implemented this year. We don't yet have a roadmap of what that funding is going to look like, but we do have assurances that the funding will be there. So this again is a great opportunity for us to not only say to Ontario, you need to work with the federal government on this to make it better, but to also speak to our members of parliament to make sure, I would say after the strategy is launched, to make sure that we can provide feedback on what it's going to look like in the future. Next slide, please. There's lots of system change going on. This is, like I said, a good opportunity. Our big focus here is going to be on that extensive drugs for rare diseases strategy, but know that the system change is happening to create a more streamlined system. So we want to be in any consultation possible that allows us to feed into this work. And then next slide, please. So these are our asks: unrestricted access and expanding access to Trikafta for those who are 6 years of age and older, make Ontario public drug programs more affordable, take a leadership role in helping to create the drugs for rare disease strategy, and define the role that private payers play. If people can't count on their private insurers right now, you know, we need to talk about that with government. It's you know, it's very important for them to hear those stories. Next slide, please. These are my last two, I think. So 3 ways to participate: you can meet with your local MPP, engage in social media, and engage with media, and you'll receive more information on this. Next slide, please. Okay, so tools and resources. So you can visit this page, and Ryan will send this deck out after the webinar. And what you will find on the campaign page is you'll find our toolkit, and that contains everything you need to get a meeting and to get ready for that meeting. And then you'll have a briefing kit with all of the asks in that we just talked through, and that's what you can leave behind or send in advance to your Member of Parliament. And then you can, we ask that you kindly fill out your report back form so that we can track who you've met with and try to fill in the gaps of MPPs that haven't been met with. Next slide, please. And we have some webinars you can watch: how to engage with your elected official, that's done with the advocate Chris Black, and how to tell your story, also done with 2 advocates. And if you get a question about, oh, I'd like to ask a question in session, in question period, feel free to contact us at advocacy@cysticfibrosis.ca. Okay. So I'm just going to quickly answer this question, and then I'm going to turn it over to Danielle because I realize we've run late. I'm very sorry. So unrestricted access, yes, we are looking for no restrictive start criteria, and that includes removing the 90%. Any other questions before I turn it to Danielle? Okay, Danielle, over to you.
Thank you very much. I should be fairly short and sweet with this. Actually, several of my points were covered by Matt earlier, so that's very helpful in saving a bit of time. So I just have some little points and advice when it comes to setting up a meeting with your MPP, having done 1 or 2 of these challenges myself and helped a few other people through it as well. My main thing going into reaching out to your MPP would be to make sure that you're up to date on the status of the current issue. For example, with Trikafta, currently the Trikafta briefings that are being held every few weeks over the Zoom calls are a great tool, just to kind of see where the applications are at, what the current issues may be that are popping up, or if something new has made itself known that you might not have heard about through social media or other means. Just make sure that you kind of have the current status on how things are going. And the reason that I find that that's something really important, in personal experience, when I reached out to my own MPP a few years ago, this was probably, I want to say this was when Orkambi was still being debated whether or not it was going to be covered. I sent in a request for a meeting and received a reply back from his staff saying, well, this is how things currently are sitting, and you know, it's not really a place for a meeting right now because we already know and we're keeping an eye on this. And I was able to reply back to them and say, actually, with all due respect, you're mistaken. Some of your information is outdated. There is some current updates to some of these things that you've outlined in your email. And I would love to address these updates and things like that in a meeting with you. So having made sure that I was up to date with all of the information actually was enough of a push to get that meeting scheduled. It's a great way to be able to tactfully stand your ground and still be respectful if they're trying to deny a meeting. And it's like, well, okay, actually, that point that you made, there's been some progress with that. If we could sit down and discuss that, it would be to both of our benefits. As Matt mentioned, have your a short and basic story ready for them. You won't have a lot of time. I don't think I've ever sat in a meeting for longer than 30 minutes at the most. So make sure that you do offer to them, like, are you at all familiar with CF? If yes, great. You don't have to put any time towards that. If not, have maybe a 1 or 2 minute just little spiel on explaining the basics of the disease and your own story. That absolutely is worth putting in a few minutes of your time, because you are their constituent and they need to know how this issue is affecting you as their constituent. They're there to work for you. So being able to kind of have a few minutes of that meeting dedicated to telling your story and why it is such an important issue for you is extremely important. I also try to make sure that I have a small information package available for them that they can look at after the meeting or during the meeting if they want to refer to any of your key messages in writing, just so that they've got it handy in case something gets missed in taking notes or anything like that. I think in writing my notes out for this, one thing that really popped up that I want to emphasize is that for those who may not have had meetings in the past, and this is a new thing for you, it's important to remember that you are going to have some good meetings and some that might not go quite as well. I've sat in meetings where the MPP has been really receptive and asked a lot of questions and showed a lot of concern. And I've sat in others, including, unfortunately, my own MPP, where they are not shy about showing their disinterest or possibly coming across as a little bit rude. It's not something to take personally. You just kind of have to maintain professionality and say, like, I understand that you might not understand, that you might not see why this is important. It might not be something personal to you, but you do work for me. Sorry, my cat's about to crash our meeting here. So it's something that you want to kind of keep in the back of your mind. Just remember, it's not always going to be 100% sunshine and rainbows, but you're there to bring an issue to their attention. So that's their job, is to listen to that and hopefully put some action forward on your behalf. As Matt mentioned earlier, if you do come across a question that you don't know the answer to, it's absolutely okay to say, you know what, at this point, I'm not sure of the answer to that. Let me get back to you. I want to make sure that any information that I give to you is accurate, and I will follow up in a couple of days once I can confirm the answer for you. So I always make sure to take in a notepad and jot down some notes, or if you happen to forget that, maybe ask if they can send you a follow-up email to just remind what information they're still waiting for. Going back to the possibly less receptive meetings, keep in mind that some things may be said that may be hurtful, unintentionally hurtful, or just kind of passing comments that may be taken the wrong way. I've actually sat in a meeting where the phrase return on investment was used in reference to a drug that would save my daughter's life. So that investment is something extremely important and personal to me, in that it would result in my daughter around late into her adult life. And it's hard to sit there and listen to something like that, but we have to keep in mind that these people may not have ever encountered this type of a situation within their own family. So they don't necessarily realize that these things can be hurtful. So I'm not saying that it needs to be expected in a meeting, but just try to keep in mind that it's a different audience. It's not somebody who lives this day to day. So just try to keep in mind that it's not a personally directed comment to you. It's just kind of the type of thinking, the fiscal thinking, if you will. Sorry, I've lost my place in my notes here. And again, as was said earlier, after a meeting, a follow-up is absolutely recommended and something that I would definitely push for. Give it a couple of days, follow up on any answers and information that you do need to provide or that you've been asked to provide. If there was nothing in the meeting that you were not able to answer, or you feel that there wasn't really anything that needed to be followed up on with what was discussed, still reach out. Just thank you so much. I do appreciate that your time is valuable and there is a lot of demand for your time. So I do appreciate the 10, 15, 30 minutes that you were able to spare for me. And I have also found in both the more positive meetings that I've had and some of the less positive ones that we've had, just the occasional check-in with the office is something that's really seemed to be well received. If something big kind of comes across, like in a couple of months, we're waiting for this decision on the 6 to 11 age group for Trikafta. I've actually had my MPP office send me a link to an article and say, hey, you know what, it's been a year and a half since we've sat down and chatted, but we saw this come through the office and we remembered that it was something that we had discussed with you, so we thought you'd be interested in case you haven't heard about it, which blew me away. But it was just a sign of how much of an impact one person and one meeting can have on an elected official. So if something big comes up, or if you have a conversation with them about Trikafta or about your child and struggling with access with your insurance company, for example, and there's a big step forward in that, it's worth firing off an email and saying, hey, again, we appreciate the meeting that we had X number of weeks ago or months ago or anything. Just thought that you would like to hear that there's been a bit of progress on this front. Here's some information that I'd like to share with you. If you'd like to have a meeting to discuss this, I'm more than open to having another meeting. So I think just keeping that open line of communication is really important. And even if it doesn't result in another meeting, just check in, say thanks again. Maybe something's coming up in question period. There's going to be a member statement or something like that read, and follow up with your MPP. Let them know we've heard that there's going to be a member statement read in question period today, or something's going on in Queen's Park. We just thought we'd drop a line and say that we're there, we're still working on this, and we appreciate the support, or we again appreciate the meeting that we were able to have. Just put it back into their minds as a bit of a reminder. Let me just see where I am here. Yeah, and I think that's about it. The biggest thing that I've found with several advocates in the past when we've had these types of meetings is if it's something new to you and you're nervous, you're maybe never met with an MPP before, or never met to discuss something on the political side of things, don't feel like you have to scramble your way through it, or that you're on your own with it. There are 3 of us here as provincial advocates, myself, Chantal, and Anne, and we are more than happy to have you reach out to us to help answer any questions that you have going into a meeting. If you'd like to just do a little bit of role play and throw some questions back and forth, in some cases, if the schedule allows for it, we may even be able to sit in on a meeting with you and just go with you as a partner or as backup. Don't feel that it's ever an inconvenience or anything like that. We're here for you, and we're here to answer your questions and help you prepare for these meetings. So we've done this a few times, some of us more than others, but we're always happy to help you prepare for these. And ultimately, we all have the same goal. So whatever we can do to help, just let us know.
Thanks, Danielle. And we are right against 2 o'clock. So what I'm going to suggest is I want to thank everybody for joining us today. Really appreciate the perspectives from H&K, the insider's knowledge, if you will. And Danielle, you've had so many meetings and you've been in all kinds of situations. So just sharing just inspiring others to go hold those meetings and helping them along the way is just so greatly appreciated. If anybody in the audience does have questions, please just email them to advocacy@cysticfibrosis.ca. We can reach out to Danielle or Alexander or Matt, or Ryan or I can help you. So thanks for tuning in. Ryan will send out all of the information of where you can find the campaign toolkit and briefing note and whatnot. And we'll see you again very soon. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Take care.
Take care.